Right, okay then folks, it looks like most people are back. So what I'm going to do for the next, I don't know, well, till the end of the session basically, is, well, give us a bit of an overview of the roots of the Pure Land tradition, and then how it developed coming through India, China, and into Japan, and explore a bit about the life of Shinran and you know, how did he come to be expounding this particular form of the teaching? How did he come to give the teachings in the Tanisho? And I've got a bit of a cough, so I'm terribly sorry if I cough at you. It's not COVID-19. It's a cough for another reason. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so this text we're looking at, the Tanisho, as I said, written by Shinran in Japan in the early 13th century, maybe late 13th century. So Shinran's dates are born in 1173, died aged 90. He had a long life, aged 90, in 1263. But actually, this whole sort of like devotional Pure Land thread of the Dharma of Buddhism has a very, very long history. So it goes right back to the Pali Canon, and then it's got sort of like, you know, over 1,000 years of development before it gets to Shinran. So let's just have a look at that. Let's have a look at that. Okay. So in the puja, we've already started by hearing this very, very beautiful text from the Sutta Nipata about Pingiya. And this is probably like the keystone text for mindfulness of the Buddha, for a faith-based approach in the Pali Canon. Oh, Annabeth, could I have it? Great. Lovely, thanks very much. Yeah, and it's like a lot of what came through in the later tradition of the Theravada. You know, you get the Abhidharma, and you get people like really focusing on the lists and the teachings and the facts. But actually, when we read the Pali Canon, okay, there's all the kind of like repetitions, but there's just occasion after occasion after occasion where someone meets the Buddha or someone meets one of his enlightened disciples, and perhaps nothing very significant gets said. You know, sometimes like you read the words on the page and you think, oh, well, that didn't seem particularly like mind-blowing. But then what happens is it has a huge impact on the person meeting that enlightened being. And what happens is they spontaneously start speaking their awe, their reverence, their respect, and their desire to go for refuge. So the standard phrases that come up again and again in the stories, the earliest stories of the Buddha, someone says, "It is amazing, Venerable Gautama. It is wonderful, Venerable Gautama." Just as if one might set upright what has been overturned, or reveal what has been hidden, or bring a lamp into a dark place, so that those with eyes could see what was there. So in many ways, the Dhamma has been explained by the Venerable Gautama. I take refuge in him. I take refuge in the Dhamma. I take refuge in the Sangha. From today, may the Buddha accept me as follower who has gone to him for refuge, for life. And obviously it's like, I'm sure they wouldn't all have said exactly the same thing, but I imagine that kind of, wow, I have just encountered something that is completely out of my previous experience. That experience, I think, was the common factor. And sometimes they do write other things. There's a chap called Sabir, who no one ever seems to have heard of. He's in the Sutta Nipata, and he just goes on for pages about like how amazing the Buddha is, and it's like water on a lotus leaf, and it's like a lion in the jungle with nothing to frighten and nothing to fear, and he just goes off on this totally enthusiastic wave about how amazing it has been for him to meet somebody embodying complete presence, complete mindfulness, complete metta, and this quality which is other, that is something else, that is something outside of our usual experience. And so even during the time of the Buddha, recollecting the Buddha becomes a practice. So we've seen how, with Pingia, for him, recollecting the Buddha, recollecting the impact that this person has on him, it's his total practice. It's his total practice. With constant and careful vigilance, it is possible for me to see him with my mind as clearly as with my eyes, by night as well as day. So it's like, it's a thread that goes through his whole life, is recollecting the Buddha no matter what he's doing. And then you get the beautiful bit where, so Pingia is talking to his old teacher Bharvari, and all of a sudden it just says, then the Buddha spoke. So you can understand that however you like, but Pingia doesn't jump up and down going, oh, what happened? What happened? It's like, in a way, he's recollecting the Buddha, and there's a level where the Buddha is genuinely present to him. And what does the Buddha say? He says, Pingia, other people have freed themselves by the power of confidence. Vakali, Bhadravada, and Alavi Gautama have all done this. You too should let that strength release you. You too will go to the further shore beyond the draw of death. So what the Buddha does is he tells Pingia, yes, the power of confidence is a total path, like the power of trust or faith will take you all the way. And at the end, we have Pingia saying, you may consider this as mind released. Very, very beautiful. And then we have other parts of the Pali Canon where again and again, the Buddha and his disciples recommend to people as a practice recollecting the Buddha. So I've just picked one of these because I think it's really gorgeous. And it's Mahanama. I'm very fond of Mahanama. He just asks all sorts of very, very interesting questions. This is one where the Buddha has been staying for the rains in this place near where Mahanama lives. And Mahanama has been having, frequent teachings, and he's been seeing the Buddha. And now the Buddha is leaving. He's going off to start wandering again. And Mahanama asks this question about dwelling places. In which dwelling place for the mind should we live? And the Buddha gives him 6 things to reflect upon. And the first is recollection of the Buddha. There is the case where you recollect the Tathagata. Indeed, the Blessed One is worthy and rightly self-awakened, consummate in knowledge and conduct, well gone, an expert with regard to the world, unexcelled as a trainer for those people fit to be tamed, the teacher of divine and human beings, awakened, blessed. And then what he does is he sort of says, well, he kind of lays out for Mahanama, well, what is the effect of recollecting the Buddha? You know, why would you do this? So then he says, at any time when a disciple of the noble ones is recollecting the Buddha, their mind is not overcome with passion. It is not overcome with aversion. It is not overcome with delusion. So if we are recollecting the Buddha, he's saying our mind is protected from the kleshas, from the poisons that cause us and others suffering. So back to the Buddha. Their mind heads straight based on the Buddha. And when the mind is headed straight, the disciple of the noble ones gains a sense of the goal, gains a sense of the Dhamma, gains joy connected with the Dhamma. These are all the effects of bringing the Buddha to mind. We gain joy connected with the Dhamma. And then it goes on, in one who is joyful, rapture arises. In one who is rapturous, the body grows calm. One whose body is calmed experiences ease. In one at ease, the mind becomes concentrated. So we're going up the spiral path there as far as samadhi. And then he gives Mahanama this bit of advice. Mahanama, you should develop this recollection of the Buddha while you are walking, while you are standing, while you are sitting, while you are lying down, while you are busy at work, while you are resting in your home crowded with children. So I just really like that detail because it's like he's specifically saying, this is a practice that is fantastic for your ordinary life. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can be in your home crowded with children. You can be busy at work. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can always bring the Buddha to mind and it will have these effects. Yeah. I love it. I just love it. So then the Buddha dies. He attains parinirvana. And then, of course, nobody can meet the Buddha in person in that kind of ordinary human being to human being way. And I don't know that there's much that's very explicit about how this developed after the Buddha's death. But certainly we have the Buddha saying, inviting his lay followers to make stupas, the bowl on the folded robes. And that would be a way of bringing the Buddha to mind. Yeah. So then we move on from the Pali Canon. So what we have next is the Pure Land Sutras. Okay, so we've gone into Mahayana territory here. You know, we've got this whole thing with, you know, the original early Buddhism gets, you know, initially people are practicing, they're really in touch with how it was to be with the enlightened mind. They have a full and rich practice. And then some people started to feel that it all got a bit narrow and it got a bit dry and it got a bit about lists. There are a lot of lists. Okay. And then you get the Mahayana sort of like breaking out and going like, no, don't miss the main point. It's like this. It's amazing. It's fantastic. Okay, so then we're on to the Pure Land Sutras. Now, we don't actually know when these were written, who they were written by. They were probably transmitted in an oral tradition for quite a long time before they were written down. And it's thought that they were written down between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century of the Common Era, so sometime around then. But that's just when they were written down. Do you see what I mean? So they might actually be just as old as the Pali Canon tradition, we just don't know. Let's let's start off with these. So in a way, we start off in familiar territory. So here we are with the longer Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra. There's the longer, the shorter, and the Amitaya Dhyana Sutra. And Ratnagun has written a fantastic book about them if you want to know more. But let's just have this key bit of the longer Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra. So we start off in fairly familiar ground. So the Buddha is in Rajagriha on the Vulture's Peak with a great company of 32,000 bhikshus. And everyone except Ananda is an arahant. Don't you feel for Ananda? And there's umpteen bodhisattvas led by Maitreya, and it's all really amazing. And Ananda asks the Buddha a question because he sees that the face and body of the Tathagata are shining like the autumn moon, or like a piece of gold fresh from the furnace. And Ananda asks him, do you dwell in the transcendental state of the Buddha? Or something. And this is what Bhante says. At this point, the familiar ground melts beneath our feet. Rajagriha and Vulture's Peak vanish, and we find ourselves in the midst of the unlimited vastness of the spiritual universe. We have passed out of time into eternity, from the mundane to the transcendental. History has been left far behind. The great myth begins. So this is where the truths of the Dharma start being conveyed, not just by, well, have you tried sitting on your meditation cushion and focusing on your breath? Instead, it's being conveyed by this great myth which expresses something about the nature of how things are. And in a way, it's like we're not meant to take it literally, but it's telling us something that is more true than our everyday conceptions about the world. This is Bhante again. In the time of the Buddha Lokeshvara Raja, there lived a monk named Dharmakara. So we're in a kind of like mythic ancient past where Buddha after Buddha after Buddha succeeds in loads of different world systems. One day, this monk, after worshipping and praising the Buddha Lokeshvara Raja, resolved in his presence to become a Buddha and requested Lokeshvara Raja to describe to him the qualities of an ideal Buddha country. So then Lokeshvara Raja spent a full koti of years, that's like a long time, explaining to Dharmakara the excellencies and perfections of Buddha countries belonging to 81,000 niyutas of kotis of Buddhas. I don't know what those words mean either. It means really long time. And then having heard this, Dharmakara spent 5 kalpas concentrating on all these excellencies and perfections. And then he reappeared before his teacher, who had a very long life, and requested him to hear what his vows were and what, after he had become a Buddha, his Buddha country would be like. And then follows these 48 great vows about the Buddha land that Dharmakara hopes to create. And I'm just going to read the 18th vow, which is the one focused on by Shinran. When I have obtained Buddhahood, if those beings who are in the 10 quarters should believe in me with serene thoughts, and should wish to be born in my country, and should have, say, 10 times thought of me, or 10 times repeated my name. If they should not be born there, may I not obtain the perfect knowledge, barring only those beings who have committed the 5 deadly sins and who have spoken evil of the good Dharma. And then his teacher, Lakeshwara Raja, says, wow, that sounds amazing. That'll be a fantastic Buddha field. This is my words, not his. And then he predicts him to Buddhahood. He says, yes, you are going to become a Buddha and you are going to create this fantastic land. And so later on in the Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, Ananda asks the Buddha and says, well, did it happen? You know, did Amitabha become a Buddha? And the Buddha says, yes. Dharmakara had indeed attained the highest perfect knowledge. And he also says, the light and life of Amitabha are immeasurable. So because Amitabha did become a Buddha, and he said, if he became a Buddha, may he not become a Buddha unless all these vows were completed. As he did become a Buddha, that means his vows did become completed. And that means that if we think of him or chant his name even 10 times, we will be born in the Pure Land. That's the myth. That's the myth. Okay. Yeah. So I think let's just have a couple of brief definitions here. So what's a Pure Land and who's Amida? So part of the thing about Pure Land is it's been related to in different ways by different practitioners through time and space. So actually there are different ways of understanding what a Pure Land is. So you could take it completely literally. I would imagine the vast majority of Pure Land practitioners have taken it completely literally, that Amitabha exists and there's a Pure Land, and if you chant his name, you can be born there. And in a way, if you lived in a traditional society, what would be the problem with that? Sometimes I feel like we've lost a lot by not being able just to kind of like go along with that sort of thing. More principially, it's a realm where practicing the Dharma is easy. Everything is helping us become enlightened. So you get this expressed very poetically with the Pure Land. You know, the birds are singing the sound of the Dharma, and the wind in the trees is telling us of the deepest teachings, and we are there with the Sangha. It's like a collective symbol. So you could say in our terms, a retreat is like a micro Pure Land. When we go to a Buddhist centre or a Buddhist group, it's like a micro Pure Land. There are conditions where actually it's hard to be on retreat and not practice the Dharma. Whereas in our everyday lives, well, generally it's not so easy to practice the Dharma. Everything isn't just sort of set up to help you practice the Dharma. But it's quite hard to be on retreat, certainly on a residential retreat, and not practice. And we can also think of it as not any particular place in space or place in time, but more like a field of influence of the Buddha. So in that sense, every time we're bringing the Buddha to mind, every time we see one of our micro shrines we're going to be setting up all over the place, it's like we've stepped back into the field of influence of Shakyamuni Buddha. We're back within that Buddha Kshetra, this field of influence of the Buddhas. We've stepped back into the Buddha's influence. So I think more traditionally, a Pure Land has been regarded as like the last place you're reborn before you get enlightened. And that does actually go right back to the Pali Canon with the pure abodes, where Maitreya is supposed to be, you know, one non-returners. The Buddha talks about once returners, non-returners, and stream entrants. So if you've really practiced the Dharma, you don't get reborn back in this world. You get reborn in a pure abode and get enlightened from there. But as we kind of move on through the tradition, and certainly I think for Shinran, it's more like the Pure Land is a colourful symbol for enlightenment. That's Bante's phrase, a colourful symbol for enlightenment. So definitely, you know, when you're reading the Tanisho, and Shinran is talking about birth in the Pure Land, he is talking about enlightenment itself. To be born in the Pure Land is to have our consciousness completely freed from self and other. And in that Pure Land tradition, you're born in the Pure Land and then you return back into the world to help beings. So then we've got what is Amida. Called either Amitabha, limitless light, or Amitayas, limitless life. So you've got these two aspects of light, that's like limitless through space. The light goes everywhere, illuminating all of space. And life through time. So no matter where you are in time, where you are through your life, the influence of Amida can always be there. And just this kind of term limitless. So you've got Mida, that's like the same root as meter, so it's like measure. And then you've got A, which is the negative prefix. So Amida, limitless. And it's like, we think very much in terms of the Indo-Tibetan tradition, where we've got the 5 Buddha mandala, and Amida is in the West, and he's red, and he's, you know, meditating and that. Whereas in the Pure Land tradition, Amida is golden. He's not red at all. And it's more like you've got Shakyamuni as enlightenment within space and time, this human figure. And then you've got Amida as that principle, as like the cosmic Buddha, the Buddha beyond time and space, the Buddha that can always be accessed. And this evening we're going to hear from another of the Pure Land Sutras. Lena Matti is going to be reading to us from the Amitaya Dhyana Sutra about Queen Vaidehi, who's in a dungeon. So, you know, she's imprisoned. And yet the influence of the, you know, and she's been sort of like imprisoned and cooped up, and, you know, she's got no access to anything. And yet the Buddha can come to her right in that situation. So no matter where we are, we can step into the influence of the Buddha. Okay. Right. So now we get on to the Pure Land school, sort of as seen by the Jodo Shinshu, which is the school set up eventually by followers of Shinran. And there are 7 patriarchs chosen by Shinran, chosen retrospectively. I don't think they would have seen themselves as kind of like setting up a Pure Land back then. But so the first one is Nagarjuna, of the Perfection of Wisdom schools. And he says this lovely thing where practicing the paramitas, it's the difficult path. It's like travelling on land, slow and painful. But the easy path is the path of faith. And it's delightful and quick, like travelling by boat on a waterway. And we should worship, uphold, and call the names of the Buddhas in the 10 directions. And he seems to be a bit sniffy about the path of faith. He sort of says, well, if you're weak and cowardly, you could take that path. But, you know, a strong man would take the path of the paramitas. And I sort of think, well, why? I'd go by boat myself. And then we have Vasubandhu from the Yogacara school, one of the founders of the Yogacara school. And he wrote a commentary on the longer Sukhavati Vyuha school, which is important to Pure Land Buddhists. And he talked about gates, Pure Land gates. And the idea with that is a path is long and onerous, but a gate, you just have to open it and step through. And then we get 3 Chinese patriarchs. Okay, I do not know how to say Chinese, so this probably isn't quite right, but you'll get the idea. So we've got Tan Huan, Dao Chou, and Shan Dao. So Tan Huan introduced this idea of the 3rd age of the Dharma, which I don't actually agree with, but it was very prevalent in his time in China and also in Japan, where people felt that we were in the age of corrupted Dharma. So initially, at the time of Shakyamuni, it had been possible to practice the Dharma and get enlightened. But now we were so far away from the Buddha's teaching that it was no longer possible to practice or get enlightened. Now, that would make you a bit miserable, wouldn't it? So he thought, oh my goodness, my computer isn't plugged in. Do you reckon you could go and plug my computer in or turn it on? Right. Okay, sorry about that, folks. It's a good job I'm not telling you that mindfulness is my main practice, isn't it? Right. Where were we? Yes. Okay. Right. So we've got Tan Huan, who basically feels it's not possible for him by himself to get enlightened anymore. It's only possible to rely on other power. But he feels like both are needed. Self-power is needed. We need to do the practices, and other power is needed. So there are all these different Pure Land practices that are being done by Buddhists of all different schools, like both in India and in China, and when it gets to Japan. So you'd be doing your mindfulness of breathing and metta bhavana, but you would also be visualizing the Pure Land. You would also be praying to Amitabha to be reborn in the Pure Land. So it's like it was a thread of other power that was running alongside the self-power practices. So then Tan Huan introduced the practice of reciting Amida's name as opposed to visualizing him. And Shan Dao certainly was quite important to Shinran. And he talks about 5 practices connected with the Pure Land and Amitabha. But he says one is most important. He calls it the rightly determining practice. And it is simply reciting the name, nembutsu. And partly you get this shift because, Shan Dao was very concerned that ordinary people weren't able to practice. They weren't able to move towards enlightenment. So, it was all very well if you were a monk, all you had to do, or a nun, all you had to do was get fed by the lay people, and then you could spend hours visualizing the Pure Land. Marvelous. But what if you were just an ordinary person? What if you had your living to earn? What could they do? And so this is where the practice of reciting the name, reciting Amitabha's name comes in. And the 6th patriarch, we're now in Japan. So we've got Genshin, who was a Tendai monk, one of the main schools of Buddhism in Japan at that time. And then the seventh is Honen. So Honen is Shinran's teacher. So Shinran never started his own school. And right to the end of his life, he always insisted that he was just a disciple of Honen. And when asked himself, he said, I, Shinran, do not have a single disciple. Okay, so I think I'm going to go on to Shinran, and then like Honen will kind of like wrap in with that. So Shinran, he was born in kind of like the low levels of the Japanese aristocracy to Lord and Lady Arinori. But very early in Shinran's life, they both died, and he was left an orphan. And he joined a monastery at the age of 9. Now, I imagine partly this is something that you could do if your parents had been both killed and you needed somewhere to go. But also, it's said that he had a very strong sense of impermanence, and he needed to know, well, what happens when we die? So there's a short poem that he's said to have composed aged 9 when he went into this monastery. Like the cherry blossom, the heart planning on tomorrow is ephemeral indeed. What sudden storm may not arise in the middle of the night? So he learns young about impermanence and suffering. And also in Japan at that time, it is not a stable period. Japan is descending into political instability. It goes into intermittent civil war for about 500 years at this point. There are famines, there are epidemics, there are, I don't know, different factions with armies, including different monastic institutions with private armies. It's not a stable society, and he's looking around at this and he's thinking, what is this existential situation? How do I relate to this world? How do I relate to this life? So he practices for 20 years. He's in Mount Hiei Monastery, which is a Tendai monastery. And he's doing all sorts of practices, including Pure Land practices, like walking round the Rupa of Amida for 90 days with no rest and sleeping stood up against a shelf. Sounds awful. We've got it easy. But for 20 years, he does everything. He meditates. He is, in a full monastic situation. He studies all the scriptures. He does it all. And aged 29, he thinks, I've done this for 20 years and it's not working. It's not working. You can see that he's just got this real existential drive. It's like, it's not, because he could just say, oh dear, it's not working. Well, never mind, I'll just forget that and just kind of see if I can make myself a nice life somewhere. I can just stop trying to do this spiritual life. But that obviously isn't okay for him. So what happens is he leaves his monastery and he goes to Kyoto, where there's a big temple, a hexagonal hall enshrining Canon or Kuan Yin Avalokiteshvara in Japan. And he spends 100 days in this hall. And on the 95th day, in a dream, Kuan Yin comes to him and she tells him to go and find Honen. And she says this verse to him. If you, because of the fruition of past karma, are driven to make love to a woman, then I shall take on the body of a beautiful woman to be ravished by you. This is the translation, okay? Throughout your life, I shall adorn you well, and at death, I shall lead you to birth in the paradise. So apart from anything, I'd take this to mean that Shinran was struggling with celibacy. But what this means is that Shinran realizes that the Dharma life does not have to be identified with being a monk. Now, can you see a parallel with Bhante? He realized the Dharma life does not have to be identified with being a monk. Commitment is primary, lifestyle is secondary. And so Shinran goes to find Honen, and Honen is teaching this Dharma of just chant the nembutsu. It doesn't matter what your situation is, chant the nembutsu and wholeheartedly call on Amida, and it is a path of faith. Would anyone mind if we finished 5 minutes late? Okay, just what with my computer going off, we're going to finish halfway through Shinran's life, which would seem a pity. Okay. Yeah. So Honen has been teaching in Kyoto for a number of years, probably since Shinran was a little kid, and he's got quite a following there. So there are quite a few people really interested in this teaching of just say the nembutsu, entrust to the other power of Amida's vow. And he's got quite a lot of supporters. So he's got a regent emperor, he's got politicians, he's got aristocrats, he's also got a lot of the lower classes. And this was considered socially disruptive. So Honen is saying anyone can do this. So he's got geishas, prostitutes. He's got like the sort of serf or slave class practicing this teaching. He's got ex-thieves. He's got people who would be considered real undesirables, and he's saying actually everyone is equal with this. Everyone can say the nembutsu. You can do it in any situation. A lot of women are practicing this because they're excluded from a lot of the religious establishments. And he's becoming quite popular. So Shinran goes along, he learns from Honen, he becomes Honen's disciple. Now, there's the kind of like social instability part of this. And there's also the fact that Honen isn't saying that you need to practice ethics to be born in the Pure Land. You don't need to practice ethics. And this is very, very controversial. So it's controversial because it seems to undermine the usual standard Buddhism, and it's also controversial because people see it as undermining society, undermining the social contract. So what happens is there is a sex scandal in the emperor's court, not involving Shinran or Honen, but with some of their disciples. And this is outrageous. People always get outraged about sex, much less about violence. It's quite interesting. So it's fine for all these monasteries to have armies and go around kind of like vandalizing and oppressing. But when it comes to sex, that is, beyond the bounds. So this sex scandal erupts. The 2 disciples that are involved are beheaded. And Honen, Shinran, and a lot of his other disciples are stripped of their monastic status and they are exiled. Now, at some point, Shinran has married, and this is also very revolutionary. that a cleric, a monastic, should marry, that this is also seen as sort of destabilising society. So Shinran goes and moves off to the provinces with his wife Eshini, who is also a practitioner in her own right. And he's given a new name because, Shinran, that's his monastic name, and he calls himself Gutolku. So Tolku means stubble-headed, and it's a term of abuse. It's a monk that doesn't follow his vows. Maybe he's got an illicit mistress or something like that. And Gu means stupid or foolish. So the stupid, foolish monk who can't follow his vows. And he considers himself a bombu, a fool. He just thinks, well, I'm a complete numpty. Here am I just keep on trying to practice the Dharma, but actually I'm just full of selfish desires and egotism, but actually there's something else that can happen. I can just have faith in the compassionate vow of Amida. I can trust that there's little me here, and that little me isn't going to be able to get enlightened. But actually, I don't need to get enlightened. Dharmakara has done it for me. By all his merit over those 5 kalpas, I can simply entrust to that vow. So for Shinran, it becomes a path of total faith. Now, I'm not sure how different what Honen was teaching and what Shinran is teaching actually are, but how it's come down in their respective schools, because there's one school, the Jodo Shu, that is based on Honen's teaching, and there is another, the Jodo Shinshu, based on Shinran's teaching. So in Honen's school, it's like, yes, you can rely on Dharmakara's vow, but you have to do the work as well. It's like you have to recite the nembutsu as much as you can. Whereas for Shinran, actually, how can that make sense? If self-power practices aren't going to work, surely saying the nembutsu with the aim of being born in the Pure Land, well, that's not going to work either. All we can do is just trust that Dharmakara has done it for us already. The key experience is entrusting. It's faith. How do we simply place our faith in the transcendental? How do we place our faith in Dharma Niyama processes? How do we trust that that level of conditionality will take us to enlightenment? So for Shinran, saying Amida's name, it's more like it's a spontaneous expression of gratitude, like the spontaneous arising of emotion when people were meeting the Buddha and they were saying, how amazing, how wonderful. Venerable Gota, I take refuge in the Buddha. In a way, it's like we become aware of the amazingness of the Buddha, us stepping into a Buddha field, the Buddha becoming present to us, and we are spontaneously saying, wow, and we call on the name of Amida, or we call on the name of whatever Buddha or Bodhisattva we are connected with. So what was important for Shinran was Shinjin, this mind of faith and entrusting. And even that is a gift from Amida and not our own. So as this faith arises, what that means is at that very moment, that's the turning about of mind. When trust arises, when faith arises, we can trust that experience, we can rely on it. And that is what will determine birth in the Pure Land, enlightenment. So I'll just finish with this quote from Bhante. And just to say, we're going to be, I've just introduced like umpteen different themes, and we're going to be pulling out like one every day. So, tomorrow we're going to be looking at the nembutsu, and the day after that we're going to be looking at faith, going for refuge, ethics, metta, etc. So we're going to be pulling out all the different threads. But Bhante says, this teaching of simply relying on Shinjin, or this assurance of birth in Sukhavati without ethics or merits, it's not the antinomianism, that means ditching ethics, for which it might at first sight be mistaken. It is merely intended to assert the absolute discontinuity of the transcendental and the mundane. In the last resort, emancipation depends upon the eruption into the universe of a factor that confronts our ego consciousness as the other power. The transcendental truth shines no less brightly and certainly more beautifully through the medium of cosmic myth than it did through the conceptual formulations of the doctrine. Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll leave it there. So enjoy your afternoons, and see you here for some meditation this afternoon.